Welcome back to Pause and Respond. I'm Josh Rine, licensed professional counselor. Today we're talking about something most people do constantly without even realizing it. They shrink what they really mean. They soften the message, minimize the feeling, water down the boundary, and edit the truth before it ever leaves their mouth. And over time, this creates emotional exhaustion because people stop communicating honestly and start communicating safely. Instead of that hurt me, it becomes I'm okay. Instead of I need more support, it becomes I'm fine. Instead of that crossed a boundary, it becomes don't worry about it. And after enough years of doing this, many people no longer even know how to communicate directly without guilt, fear, or anxiety showing up. And that's what we're unpacking today. Because shrinking your communication may reduce discomfort temporarily, but it quietly increases resentment internally. One of the clear signs of emotional filtering is when people communicate smaller versions of what they actually feel. Not false versions, but smaller versions. And that distinction matters because most people are not outright lying. They're simply just minimizing, they're reducing, softening, maybe diluting and editing. And they usually do it automatically. If somebody asks you, did that bother you? And internally the answer is yes, but externally the answer is a little bit, somebody crosses a line. Internally that was disrespectful, but externally it's probably not a big deal. And this happens constantly. And people often think they are being mature by minimizing themselves. But many times they are simply avoiding emotional discomfort because direct honesty feels vulnerable. People shrink communication for many reasons. Could be fear of conflict, rejection, disappointment. They don't want to be seen as too emotional or too difficult or losing connection with others. And for most people, this pattern started pretty early on. Maybe expression of emotions created tension growing up. Maybe honesty was punished or boundaries created guilt. Maybe emotional needs were ignored or mocked. So their nervous system adapted. It stayed small, stayed agreeable, stayed easy to deal with. Do not create discomfort. And eventually, that adaptation became identity. Those people became known as the calm one, the understanding one, the easygoing one. But internally, they often feel emotionally unseen because nobody is actually hearing the full truth from them. They're simply only getting the filtered one. Now, here's what people do not realize. Every time you repeatedly minimize what you honestly feel, you're reinforcing internal disconnection. Because the nervous system starts learning, my feelings are too much. My real needs are inconvenient. My honesty creates problems. It's safer to just reduce myself. And that creates emotional fragmentation. Externally, people may still function well, but internally they feel resentment, disconnected, anxious, emotionally invisible. And over time, people stop trusting themselves because they've spent years overriding themselves. This is one reason emotionally suppressed people often struggle with resentment. Not because other people are always intentionally trying to hurt them, but because they consistently abandon their own emotional truth in order to maintain temporary comfort. And this is important psychologically. Small communication creates large internal buildup because the nervous system still fully experiences what's minimized externally. And that means internally the emotional experience remains large while externally the communication becomes tiny. And that mismatch creates tension. And that tension accumulates. And this is why people eventually explode after staying calm for so long. The truth is they were never actually calm. They were simply just reducing expression while pressure continued to build. This happens constantly in our relationships. One person keeps saying, "I'm fine, no problem, whatever you want." Meanwhile, they feel dismissed, unimportant, overlooked, and emotionally alone. Eventually, resentment grows because their automatic emotional experience never had space to exist honestly. A lot of people confuse emotional minimization with kindness. But kindness and self-abandonment are not the same. Being thoughtful is healthy. Suppressing yourself chronically is not. Because healthy relationships require honest information. People cannot respond to needs they never clearly hear. And this is where emotional exhaustion begins. People expect others to somehow recognize emotional pain they continuously hide. Then resentment develops when others fail to respond appropriately. But emotionally healthy communication requires clarity. It can't be based on mind reading or emotional guessing, but clarity. Now, direct communication often feels uncomfortable at first because many people associate directness with conflict. But honesty is not the same thing as aggression, and that's important. You can communicate clearly without being harsh. You can express boundaries without punishment. You can communicate hurt without attacking someone. Those are examples of emotional maturity. But many people never learned regulated honesty. They learned either suppression or explosion, with nothing in between. So when they finally attempt healthy honesty, their nervous system interrupts it as dangerous. And that anxiety is normal initially. But avoiding honesty does not create peace. It creates delayed emotional pressure. And this is where the pause and respond framework becomes so powerful. Instead of automatically shrinking yourself, you pause. And during that pause, you ask, what am I actually trying to say? Not what sounds safest. What avoids discomfort. Not what keeps everybody happy. What is true? Then you communicate the honest version clearly and calmly. And that may sound like, honestly, that affected me more than I admitted. I think I minimized how frustrated I was. I need to communicate something more directly. That kind of honesty builds emotional alignment. Because your internal experience and external communication finally begin matching each other again. And alignment reduces emotional tension. Authenticity is psychologically lighter than performance. That's important. When you constantly monitor, soften, or edit and minimize yourself, the nervous system stays tense. But honesty creates relief from that tension. Not because honesty is always comfortable, but because emotional contradiction decreases. You stop carrying two versions of yourself, the external version and the internal version. And that creates psychological freedom. And emotionally healthy people are not perfect communicators. They are simply aligned communicators. The goal here is not becoming brutally honest. The goal is becoming emotionally honest enough that resentment no longer has to carry the truth for you later. because eventually unspoken emotions still communicate themselves. Through withdrawal, tone, distance, irritability, shutting down, or explosions, the truth always leaks out eventually. The question is whether it leaks through clarity or accumulated pressure. So today, try this. I want you to notice where you shrink what you really mean. Where are you softening your boundaries or minimizing your frustrations? Where are you saying smaller versions of what you actually feel? And what would clear, honest sound like? If this episode connected with you, the new book, Pause and Respond, The Honesty Advantage, goes much deeper into these concepts, such as resentment, emotional regulation, boundaries, and overthinking. Overall, learning how to communicate clearly without becoming reactive. You can get the books, workbooks, podcast resources, and coaching information at pauseandrespond.com. And if this episode helped you, share it with somebody who constantly minimizes what they feel in order to keep other people comfortable. Because shrinking yourself may reduce tension temporarily, but it often increases emotional disconnection internally. This is Pause and Respond. Less reaction, more choice.